He's one of the most famous multitaskers of all time, the original Renaissance man, an artist, an inventor, whose ideas outstripped his own age. The tank, the diving suit, the helicopter. But little known evidence has come to light that suggests a different story, one far less revolutionary than commonly believed.
He is very aware of the knowledge of his time, and he draws from this knowledge.
Could it be that this medieval superstar was not, after all, a man ahead of his time? In an investigation which delves into the actual technological advances of the 15th and 16th century Europe, and uses modern tools to peel back the layers of this most iconic painting, we open the mystery files on Leonardo da Vinci. Italy in the 16th century, one of the greatest eras of innovation in arts, engineering and science the world has ever known. And perhaps its most celebrated figure is Leonardo da Vinci. In the centuries since his death, he has been transformed into an almost godlike symbol of the Italian Renaissance. Renaissance historian Monica Azzolini is exploring Da Vinci's elevation to the highest rank of Italy's great artists.
Leonardo over time has become almost an icon. So there is this romantic idea of the Renaissance genius, and he has embodied that idea. So it's very much a kind of creation of a myth that represents all that is good about the Renaissance.
The investigation into how Leonardo and his cult status begins in 1542 in the town of Vinci in Tuscany. Leonardo is born the bastard son of a peasant girl and a respected notary. Yet despite these humble beginnings, Leonardo will go on to influence the thinking of virtually every path of learning. But it was only long after his death that the staggering extent of ideas and disciplines Leonardo turns his talents to becomes clear.
Leonardo's notebooks become accessible for the first time in the late 19th century. The German scholar Jean-Paul Richter starts transcribing and then translates a large number of his notebooks. And with the publication of his work in the late 19th century, the content of his notebooks becomes finally available and accessible to scholars.
Astounded by ideas and inventiveness captured in his notebooks, the public begins to revere Leonardo as some kind of supernatural genius.
The perception of Leonardo changes because scholars realize the vast amount of his knowledge, the variety of his subjects, and therefore the perception of Leonardo as a polymath develops.
He begins to be seen as a man capable of almost anything. Yet experts are uncovering evidence that some of the ideas in Leonardo's notebooks may not, after all, have originated in the mind of the great man himself. Leonardo's precocious talent had, in fact, brought him in direct contact with many of the movers and shakers of the Renaissance. In the late 15th century, the great art patron Ludovico Sforza seizes the Duchy of Milan from his nephew. He takes over the family seat in Milan, the Sforza Castle, and hires the leading artists and engineers to adorn it. In 1482, Leonardo is invited to join Sforza's select circle. He stays at the castle for 17 years. In 1496, Luca Pacioli, the eminent mathematician, moves into Sforza's court.
While teaching in Milan, he gets to know Leonardo, and Leonardo learns much of his mathematics from Luca Pacioli. So there was a sort of relationship of student-pupil.
In 1499, the French invade Italy, and Sforza is toppled from power. Now without a patron, Leonardo and Pacioli leave Milan, but carry on their collaboration.
Leonardo himself then helps Pacioli. He's credited with having drawn the polyedra, that is to say the solids that are in one of Pacioli's most distinguished works, the Divina Proporzione, on divine proportion.
The mathematical knowledge he soaks up while with Pacioli underpins much of the engineering work he will later become renowned for. And maths is not the only area where Leonardo learns from others. Further investigations appear to have uncovered the inspiration for some of Leonardo's famous inventions. The diving suit, the tank, the flying machines. Could it be that these futuristic designs were not conceived by Leonardo da Vinci? Professor Paolo Galluzzi has extensively studied Italy's scientific heritage. From Florence, he is well placed to investigate Leonardo's links to other engineers of the Renaissance.
If we want to approach the real Leonardo, the historical Leonardo, we have to put Leonardo into context.
In the beginning of the Renaissance, there is a flourishing of technological advancement in Siena. A hotbed of activity, Siena becomes a center of engineering innovation. Only 50 kilometers separate the cities. A new movement emerges that tries to combine classical technology with the development of experimental devices. Mariano Taccola is at the forefront of this new breed of engineers.
Taccola is a very important step in this because his manuscripts are full of images, hundreds and hundreds of images of machines. It's a revolution compared to what we have before.
The Italian Renaissance towns are filled with statues of their illustrious former residents, but Taccola is surprisingly not celebrated as extensively. In spite of this, 5 surviving volumes of this groundbreaking artist-engineer's work serve as recognition to his ingenuity. And the similarities between Taccola's drawings and Leonardo's notebooks are hard to ignore. There is even a figure resembling the Vitruvian Man, albeit cruder than Leonardo's famous drawing. And there is documentary evidence that Leonardo saw Taccola's work. Francesco di Giorgio, another prominent Sienese engineer, inherited all of Taccola's manuscripts and based some of his work on them, improving the quality of design and illustration, just as Leonardo would later do with Di Giorgio's. Leonardo certainly owned at least one of Di Giorgio's manuscripts. One survives from Leonardo's personal library that still has Leonardo's own notes in the margins.
I have found only one evidence, direct evidence of a, let's call it, quotation of Taccola in Leonardo's manuscripts. But this is enough to let us suppose, more than suppose, that Leonardo had access to Taccola. Francesco di Giorgio inherited all Taccola's manuscripts, and Leonardo owned one of Francesco's manuscripts. So there is a transmission of knowledge from Taccola to Francesco di Giorgio to Leonardo.
In the Sienese manuscripts, there are images of underwater breathing devices, many of which are surprisingly similar to Leonardo's.
We have records from early 15th century texts of attempts at putting man in condition to go underwater.
Leonardo's design seems to be an amalgamation of all of them. But like the Vitruvian Man, Leonardo's drawings have distinct differences too.
It's very crude, very rude drawing, and you do not understand as much as you understand from Leonardo's.
So Leonardo doesn't invent the first underwater diving mask, but he does significantly advance the prototype. And it is not just that Leonardo's illustrations are better, he technically improves the apparatus. Leonardo has also entered popular culture as a pioneer in the field of flight. Allegedly the first to understand aviation principles, he is now honored as the inventor of countless flying devices to launch man through the air, from parachutes to hang gliders to helicopters. Historian Dr. Tobias Capwell has come to the English county of Wiltshire to investigate the life of one of Leonardo's forerunners, Aylmer of Malmesbury.
Aylmer was a monk based at the medieval monastery here in Malmesbury. He was probably born in about 980 or 985 AD, and he probably died shortly after the Norman invasion in 1066.
His story appears in a 12th century manuscript and reveals an achievement that challenges Leonardo's status as the trailblazer of flight design.
In the early 12th century, another monk of Malmesbury, William, wrote a history of England called The Deeds of the English Kings, and it's in this that Aylmer appears.
He was a man learned for those times, and in his early youth hazarded a deed of remarkable boldness. He had by some means fastened wings to his hands and feet so that he might fly like Daedalus, and collecting the breeze upon the summit of a tower, flew for more than a furlong. But agitated by the violence of the wind and the swirling of air, he fell, broke both his legs, and was lame ever after.
The most important part of this story, actually, as real history, is the fact that the historian, William of Malmesbury, is not only known to be one of our most reliable historians, but he also comes from the same place that Aylmer came from. William would have talked to people whose grandparents or great-grandparents had actually seen Aylmer fly over Malmesbury. So it's an extraordinary, almost eyewitness account.
The tower Aylmer launches himself from is no longer standing, but the present abbey is much the same height. Peering down from its roof, we can appreciate just how daring Aylmer was to leap into thin air. The spot where he is said to have landed is still known to villagers and is called Oliver's Lane. Oliver being the name Aylmer is mistakenly given in a 14th century retelling of the story. According to William of Malmesbury, Aylmer stays airborne for over 200 meters. That's more than half the height of the Empire State Building. Plotting Aylmer's flight path through the village today shows just how impressive his feat was.
The fact that Aylmer crashed and broke both of his legs mustn't at all be taken to mean that his flight was unsuccessful. He started at a height of 25 meters and flew for a distance of over 200 meters. That's a respectable flight, even by modern hang gliding standards. So he hadn't quite worked out the landing bit, but the flying bit he seems to have understood quite well.
However, the fact remains that Aylmer does not manage to stabilize his device. Yet, analyzing William of Malmesbury's account, it is clear that Aylmer himself realized his fault.
What's really interesting about the historical account is that he is said to have remarked that the reason his aircraft was not more stable was that he had forgotten to put a tail on it. So here we have a medieval person with the picture of a modern aircraft in their minds.
So, centuries before Leonardo is even born, people were beginning to test the principles of flight. Drawings of primitive flying machines attributed to Italian engineers predate Leonardo's sketches. Leonardo is believed to have adapted these ideas to create his more complex devices. But on closer examination, none of Leonardo's flying machines are actually the engineering marvels they are supposed to be.
A lot has been made of Leonardo as a great scientist and inventor. And of course, Leonardo's drawings of flying machines are among the most famous of his works. But we mustn't make the mistake of thinking that beautiful drawings are the same thing as ingenious inventions.